I think the best way is actually to remind everybody about American history, right? At a certain point, back in the 18th century, the people here in the United States decided that they were sick and tired of being a colony of Great Britain. Mm-hmm. So we broke away from the British Empire. We did that by means of a violent revolution. We fought a war with England, 1776. We've all learned about it in school umpteen times. We know. And an amazing thing happened. The British Empire, which at that time ruled the world. The slogan in England at that time was, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," because we've got the whole world covered, from India to Africa to, you know the story, okay? To the amazement of everybody, the British were defeated by the Americans in that Revolutionary War. But they didn't give up. In 1812, we had another war where the British Empire decided again to try to squash the new emerging economic power of the United States. 2 wars, they were defeated both times. Finally, the British got the memo. This is not going to work. You are not going to undo the history that you yourself helped to make. So what you ought to do is sit down and work out with the United States, this new get over your upset that your empire isn't growing anymore. Get over it. Recognize that your empire is now on the downturn and that a new power is arising, namely the United States. And they worked out a peace agreement that lasted a century. Okay, you want my answer? That's what we ought to be doing with Russia and China. Not go to one little war, or not so little, one proxy war. Next, we'll have a war that isn't a proxy war. You know, we're on the edge of it anyway, almost every day. We'll do something in the South China Sea. We'll provoke one way or another, or we will be provoked. This is a dead end. It's not in our interest. It's not in their interest. We need to live with this new emerging economic power. We don't need to keep trying to squash it. It doesn't work. Every other empire, Greek, Roman, British, Persian, Ottoman, you go through them. They all had a ride up, then they plateaued, and then they went down. The last 100 years has been the American empire, especially after World War II. It was a great ride up for the U.S. It's going to be a bumpy, difficult ride down. And the sooner we face it, the better our judgments will be and the better our policies will be, because where we are going, whether it's Ukraine or banning TikTok or hounding Huawei, these are things that are going to hurt the U.S. I would agree with that. I understand why it's being done. I understand that many of the things that are happening in the economy, which is what I study, have to do with a rather desperate effort of the United States to reverse history. That doesn't usually work out real well. And I don't expect it's going to work out real well this time either. But it's a way for politicians to pander, and they don't usually miss a chance to doing that if it gives them some advantage. Look, my experience over many, many years is that actions like this never have 1 or 2 causes. They are decisions that are made that meet a bunch of criteria, or if you like, respond to a variety of causes, any one of which wouldn't have been enough to make it happen, but it's the whole collection of them that make it happen. So yeah, one of the factors going into the TikTok decision was the convenient way you can have the government favor one competitor over others. It is often arranged by those other competitors to get rid of the one that they don't like or that they can all agree on getting rid of. And so that becomes part of the story. You could see that already, or this helps you figure it out, by going after the Huawei Corporation, which produced last year and the year before things that compete with American companies. So this was a convenient way, before the general onslaught against China really got going, to strike a blow, to get some support for sitting politicians from those who benefit by getting rid of Huawei. And same thing with TikTok. From an economics point of view, it's kind of remarkable. I've lived all my life in the United States. I was born in Ohio and been working here all my life. And I grew up at a time when we were told in the economics courses I took in the universities where I've taught economics all my life, that an economy works best if it's private. And if the government doesn't enter in, do this, do that, regulate this, choose one company over another. We were told literally that this is a bad thing to be avoided at all costs. So I think one important thing is to recognize that all of that stuff has been thrown out the window in the last 5 or 10 years, just as if it were never spoken, as if it were never taught, even though it was the dominant ideological statement of what Western capitalism was all about. And you're now seeing, it used to be a phrase, the government should not choose winners and losers in the market. That was a kind of phrase that we were told. Well, what you're seeing at every turn is exactly the opposite. The government is choosing winners and losers, helping these industries, not those industries, saving this one, not the other one, forbidding this, allowing that. It's never stopping, and it's not a sign of confidence in your system. It's a sign of fear and retreat and danger and isolation. And now let me put on my economics hat. It's not that list that you mentioned a minute ago, Iran, Russia, China. You better get out your pencil, because that list is becoming longer and longer and longer with each passing day. It used to be Russia, China, and we would, have the usual socialist bad guys or communist bad guys. But now we have all kinds of societies. The important thing to remember is something called the BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. We are isolating ourselves from them by pretending we are isolating them. But that's not the way it's working. The rest of the world is gathering around them, not us. And the make-believe that that's not the case is a dangerous form of self-delusion in the United States. Look, the war in Ukraine, whatever else you think of it, was supposed to be over in a short time once the sanctions got going. They were called the mother of all sanctions. They would bring Russia to its knees. Go back and look at the press in February, March, and April of last year. That's what they were predicting. None of that has happened. None of it. And why? Because it turned out that Russia, which is a weak economic system, and was before this war started, but Russia has really big and powerful friends, more of them each day. And they turned to those friends and they made a bad joke out of the mother of all sanctions, which hasn't stopped the war one iota. And adding more tanks and sending more shells isn't going to change that. These are more and more looking like the acts of people who took a really bad turn, cannot admit it, cannot face it, and keep doubling down in a way that makes the rest of the world shake their head. And more of us inside the United States scratching our head and wondering, what are you doing? What are you doing? And that's really where people like me, now that's where we find ourselves. I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but again, I'm astonished. I'm an economics professor. I'm astonished that the only way we are discussing as a nation dealing with the inflation is by raising interest rates, which will throw millions of people out of work. And everybody knows that, which will probably hurt the poorest amongst us most, the last hired, the first fired, all of that again, worsening the disparities of our racial community, of our ethnic community, of the genders, and on and on. Really, we're going to go through that? I'm a professor. I learned that there are other methods of dealing with inflation.
Can we talk about that? Can we talk about that?
Do not involve raising interest rates. I'm mystified why I live in a country where the people in charge know what I just said, and they refuse to discuss it. We have a country in which raising interest rates is considered like the thing, the only thing, and all that's left for us to discuss is how many percentage points it'll go up or down, how soon. Let me drive it home in a personal way. But people seem to like this, so I'll tell you this story. I got my PhD in economics at Yale University. At the time I got it, it was almost all men who were students. Women didn't go into economics then. They do much more now, but they didn't then. So there were 2 or 3 women in my class, and we all got to know them because there were only 2 or 3 women in my class. And one of them, who took the same courses I did, in the same classroom I did, from the same professor I did, was a woman you've gotten to know. Her name is Janet Yellen. So I know what she knows. She knows what I know. We were schoolmates. We went to the same graduate program. In that program, we learned that one of the most interesting ways to stop an inflation that has been used in many countries at many times, often with great success, and that was used August 15th, 1971, by the sitting president, Richard M. Nixon. He got on television and he said to the American people, we've got a terrible inflation. Here's how we're going to deal with it. As of right now, as he was speaking on radio and TV, any business that raises its price, we're going to come for you, we're going to arrest you, and you're going to jail. Any union or other worker organization that pushes or tries to push the wage up, we will do the same to you. This policy is called in this country a wage price freeze. In other countries, it's called an incomes policy because it freezes the income of the employer and the income of the employee at the same time, wherever it happens to stand. That was originally put into effect for 90 days. It was extended. It brought the inflation down. It is an alternative. It has its strengths and weaknesses, just like raising interest rates, but they're different. And an honest society trying to deal honestly with its problems would have a debate publicly about these alternatives. And by the way, there are others I could give you if you were interested. It's not the only 2. There's more than 2. But we live in a society that has a quick dismissal. If they even admit what I just explained to you, which is in every history book and can be verified in 10 minutes of Googling anything, there's no excuse for what's going on. I keep trying to explain to people, when Saudi Arabia shifts its oil resources from the West to China and Russia, this is a screaming signal, uh-oh, even the people you thought were most dependent on you aren't anymore. And unless you're blind or blinded by some ideological reflex you ought to outgrow, you're going to be making one mistake after another, and people like you and me are going to be talking about them, even though we would wish we didn't have to. Now the continuation under the neocons working with Biden. Throughout that time, the trade between the United States and China goes up every single year. There's a peculiar disconnect between, if you pardon me, the roaring bullshit from the politicians and the underlying reality that we need them. We need them to produce consumer goods. If the American people had not been able to buy cheap Chinese consumer goods over the last 30 years, they would have demanded and they would have gotten higher wages to pay what would have been the price if those things had been produced anywhere else. Capitalists in America are grateful, if they're honest, for the cheap Chinese goods that have made it possible for profits to go up without rising wages, because you could go to your neighborhood TJ Maxx store and buy inexpensive Chinese clothing, or to the other stores. You know, there is no Amazon, there is no Walmart without Chinese goods. If you plot the growth of Walmart and the growth of China, you discover something. It's the same business. The China can outproduce us on everything, but they could never have gotten into the American market unless Walmart, Target, and all the others acted eagerly to be the distributor of those Chinese goods and to make a fortune for themselves along the way. Those are the realities. The rest is make-believe. Let me just expand one dimension of that point. We now have a defense budget, depending a little bit on how you look at it, in the neighborhood of $850 billion to $1 trillion. If you take a look, it's more money than the next 8 or 9 countries in the world combined spend on their military. We have just authorized an additional $100+ billion just for the war in Ukraine. Even if you believe that one motivation for the Ukraine war is the money being made by the defense industry, we already are doing more than anyone in their right mind could ask to provide them with a profitable business. Over $1 trillion. I don't even think they're that greedy. They're getting a big bundle with no opposition. Nobody opposes the defense budget. I mean, a handful of people, but it's basically trivial. The two parties that run our politics are both eager to outdo one another in supporting the defense budget. They're in very good shape. They don't need another $100 billion war on top of the gift that this one represents. So for me, I don't think it's even them. I wouldn't mind criticizing them if I thought it, but I don't see, they've made a ton of money by all the stuff we've shipped to Ukraine, and all of that will have to be replaced. They will get the money and the profit out of that. The budget is huge, and it got a tremendous boost. Look, I'm an economist, and two things have happened in the last year that strike me as downright funny. We are in a supposed war against the inflation in our country. And to that end, we have a Federal Reserve, our central bank, that has raised interest rates. And that's supposed to slow down the spending by individuals and businesses because it's too expensive to borrow money at high interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. What's the worst thing you can do to an inflation? Pour money onto it. It's like squeezing kerosene on a campfire. It flares up as a stupid thing to do. What have we just done? We have just spent an extra $100 billion on a war in Ukraine. Most of that money goes right back into the American economy because it pays for the military one way or another. And Mr. Zelensky is not stupid. He understands he better spend that money back in the United States and not in some other country, because that will be the fastest way to cut that game over, number one. The second thing we did when our banks started to collapse a couple of weeks ago was to say that the Federal Reserve is going to come in and give any bank in trouble. Let me answer it by telling you a story. Since I am a graduate of the fancy schools in this country and have all the connections that those schools create for you when you go through them, the education you get, by the way, is quite mediocre, but the connections, they are super.
Yeah.
They're just super. All right. I have therefore been at the following conversation. A group of people sitting on the boards of directors of the biggest corporations in America. Some of them talk like you just did. They say things like, well, I'll quote you, Warren Buffett will say to the public, I pay a lower rate of taxes on my billions than my secretary does on what we pay her. Remember, he said that. He got a lot of play. So he gets it. He gets it that it's stupid what they're doing. It's self-destructive what they're doing. And he appeals to the other directors like him to see what he's saying. And he's not the only one. But the problem is there's another group of directors who come right back at him and say the following: the mass of people in this country are too divided, too disorganized, and too ignorant to figure any of this out.
They say that?
They say that.
They're
they
actually
say
that malignant. It's just evil.
Well, it's very, look, if you keep sticking it, I'm going to defend them now, but I'm only answering your question. I don't mean to defend them, but I am going to defend them. Because here's where it goes. Once you get over your anger that they talk like, think like that, which I get, you're going to ask yourself, because you're a smart guy, why? I mean, people aren't born that way. Why would they think and talk like that? And here's the answer. They were Warren Buffett's in the past. They warned in their company, look, let's not go so far. Let's give the workers a decent pay. Let's, pay our taxes. Let's spend some money to make the city nicer for people or whatever. And they got shot down by the, let's call them, for lack of a better term, the conservative-y type, pro-business types. They got shot down, and the pro-business guys stuck it to the workers some more and evaded the taxes some more and didn't give a nickel to the community. And guess what? The profits of the company went up because there was no reaction. The local politicians didn't do anything. The people didn't get the pitchforks. They didn't march down Main Street with them. None of it. And so over time, they began to feel as though their, let's call it humane impulse, or whatever you want to call it, to be nice guys as employers was a mistake. Made them look like they were weak or in some way not as gung-ho to make a profit for the company as their fellow directors. They didn't want to take that kind of risk.
Right.
They didn't want that kind of reputation. They kind of swallowed their bad feeling. They stopped telling their wife about how they felt, because the wife would notice that if you felt that way in the past, you're not feeling that way now. I don't hear you say anything about doing good for the community. You've got me sitting on the board of the local Y or the orchestra or the local charity, but you're not coming to the meetings and you're not even asking me anymore. So what you've got is a capitalist employer class whose majority thinks they can safely ignore the mass repercussions. Nothing will happen. The Republicans and the Democrats will distract people away from what we're doing to them economically. They'll get more interested in, I don't know, immigrants or in carrying a gun or whether transgender people can use the toilet. It's exactly what we were just talking about. Let me give you an example. As I'm speaking to you, in three countries of Europe is the answer. France, Germany, and Greece. In all of those countries, masses of people are letting the power structure there, both the political power structure and the business leadership, know that there are limits. In France, they are telling the president, Mr. Macron, you are not going to solve the fiscal troubles of France by depriving the people of 2 years of their pension. You're not going to do that. We're not going to let you. In Germany, all the railroad stations and all the airports are closed because the workers are on strike. And the issue there is the inflation. You are not going to jack up the price of oil and gas for all of us and then not change our wages. I mean, we're not going to tolerate it. And Greece, you might find, is even the most interesting. 4 weeks ago, they had a terrible train wreck, worse than the one we had in East Palestine, Ohio, but around the same time. It killed 60 young people, among other things. And they went into the streets to denounce the privatization of the rail system in their country. The government came down on them, and so now they're all against the government. This is making everybody stop and pay real close attention on a more positive note, because I agree with everything you've said. I really do. But I want to again point out, these things can change. In France, it was believed that their working class was divided beyond all repair, basically divided as follows. A vast group of people in the middle, then an extreme right wing associated with the Le Pen family that you may have heard about, father and now the daughter as a leader of a far right wing anti-immigration thing. And then a fractured left with a communist party, a socialist party, a green party, and all the rest. And that they could not get together. The union, there are 8 national union federations in France. We have 1, the AFL-CIO, they have 8, and they've never been able to agree on anything. In the last 5 years, all of that has changed. Here's what's happened. In the last election that Mr. Macron won and that Le Pen came in second, a very, very close third, 1 or 2 percentage points less, was a unified left in which the communists, socialists, Greens, and 3 or 4 other parties all got together. Unheard of. And they were, as I say, 2-3 percentage points less than Mr. Macron. That's all. The division in France is very dangerous for the government in power because the left was unified. In the demonstrations that have involved millions of people over the last 2 weeks and are scheduled to continue next week again, the 8 different trade unions who have been unable to agree on anything else are all agreed. They are all together leading this movement. It's led by the labor unions united. France has never seen this before. And I believe it shows the wisdom of a famous remark made by a great leader years ago. Here's how it goes. For many decades, nothing seems to happen.
Well, I must say I am continuously underwhelmed by what Mr. Trump is doing. I see it more and more as a kind of ad hoc mixture of a little bit of economic strategy, a little, but it is an economic strategy that is overwhelmed almost daily by some political need he sees, correctly or incorrectly. Let me give you an example. Everyone now knows that the best quality electric vehicle at the lowest prices is produced in China. China has a dozen or more companies competing, has had them doing that for quite some years now. And as a group, they have outcompeted their counterparts in Europe, the United States, Japan, anywhere. And yet here in the United States, we currently have a 100% tariff. It was 25% in Trump's first presidency. Then Mr. Biden, by the way, on the same strategy of supporting our automobile industry here and bringing manufacturing back to the United States, raised it to 100%. And Mr. Trump has left it at 100%, even as he negotiates with China about other tariffs. All right. The result is that in Europe, you can see BYD automobiles all over the roads. In the United States, I've never seen one. Nobody buys. There is no dealership. There is no repair system. There is no infrastructure, and there is no business. Okay, let me explain why this looks good, because it says to the American people, as Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden both did, we're going to protect auto workers. An interesting idea. You're going to protect auto workers because you make it impossible for American businesses who purchase electric cars and trucks, because that's the future of the world. They have to buy inferior vehicles at a higher price than their competitors around the world. So an American company that, for example, makes books like this book here, when it buys cars and trucks for its personnel, it can't buy the cheapest, best truck in the world. It has to buy an inferior vehicle at a higher price. Now, I'm an economist, and I know what I just said amounts to a competitive disadvantage for American employers relative to their foreign competitors, because the foreign competitors are buying BYD cars and trucks. So yes, you are saving jobs for General Motors and Ford and Toyota here in the United States because they don't face the Chinese competition. But are you protecting American manufacturing in general? Not at all. I would argue you are destroying it. No, I think it's it's sort of in the middle. This demise has been going on for some time now. Number one. Number two, whatever Mr. Trump says, it changes so often, and it is so much the product of the immediate moment and what reporter in what situation is asking him what difficult question. And his mind is probably on the Jeffrey Epstein problem that haunts him here at home and all the other issues. I wouldn't take much of a cue from this man. His function, and in that he's like most American politicians these days, his function is overwhelmingly to distract from the bad news. And they do that in two ways. The Democrats, by pretending it isn't there, and the Republicans, by pretending they have the economic power of the United States that it had in the 1960s and 70s, and that it hasn't lost all of that, and therefore is in a position, even if it admits that there's a problem, to quickly fix that problem by punishing the bad other countries that caused that problem. And so, he's busy blaming and punishing and acting as though he's in a position to do much about it. So for me, and for people who think this the way I'm about to describe, we look at the problem of the dollar, and indeed of many other problems facing the United States, as falling under the heading of the very kinds of problems that you would expect in a declining empire. That is, in a global empire past its peak and now in the very unhappy position of having to face slowly, relentlessly, that it doesn't have the power and it doesn't have the wealth it once had. And it can't solve these problems in the ways it once did. And so it needs, first of all, to face the basic problem, which we do not do here in the United States at all. I mean, if you remember last November, we had a presidential election in which three candidates, Biden, Harris, and Trump, never uttered one word about a declining empire or a declining U.S. capitalism, declining because its empire is gone. The very same people who could and did look at Great Britain and say the sad condition of that society and of that economy has more than a little to do with the disappearance of the British Empire. They can say that. They can show that. But they cannot allow even the question to be applied to the United States. The dollar, you mentioned Bretton Woods, right? The dollar becomes the world currency after the British pound and any other aspiring currency had been destroyed by World War II and couldn't possibly play that role. John Maynard Keynes had hoped to preserve that role for the British pound. But the American counterpart, Harry Dexter White, made it very clear to Mr. Keynes that that was not going to happen. And it didn't. And Mr. Keynes accepted it because he basically had no choice. The dollar became the world currency. The United States was producing half the traded goods in the world economy. The United States had the nuclear weapons. The United States, I can fill in, you all know that history. The dominant position of the United States was wrapped up in the role of the dollar. It quickly became not just the currency in which world trade was evaluated and conducted. It became a reserve alongside of gold to support the currencies of other countries by being held in that form as a dollar in the central bank portfolios of that time, or U.S. treasuries, which is the equivalent. So in that situation, everyone who thought about it would have known that this empire cannot last. Not at all forever. no empire ever has, but not even for very long, because of the bizarre situation that the other countries that would be contesting would be coming back from wartime destruction, because you can do that relatively quickly, as both Germany and Japan showed us in the years afterwards. So it should have been understood that the dollar cannot play that role. Well, the irony, and if I had time, I would go through it with people, is that this already happened by the 1960s. De Gaulle brought the gold back, didn't want to leave it here. We all know that story, or we should. And then the United States went off the gold standard in order to basically force the rest of the world to deal with the dollar. And that gave the dollar a little more time, 2 or 3 more decades. But by the end of the century, the process of decline had never stopped. The American capitalists participated and accelerated the decline when they made the decision, about the same time that the U.S. went off the gold standard, to move production to Asia. But in any case, out of the United States. The development of the jet engine and the development of the internet made it possible to supervise production as easily in China as before you did it in California, or as easily in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as before you did it in Chicago. And so the wages being much lower there, those economies being desperate to bring jobs to their country, the American corporations saw enormous profit and moved out hundreds of billions of dollars of investment abroad, crucial to the development of the Brazilian economy, the Indian economy, the Chinese economy. So the United States, which, by the way, sometimes likes to take credit for the economic development of China, and it deserves some credit. To take it away from the Chinese is childish, but that's what passes for politics in our country. But there's a grain of truth. It's partly what American corporations and European corporations and Japanese corporations did. But the end result is all of that development outside of the United States would sooner or later mean that the United States dollar wasn't necessary, did not need to play this role. And then big countries like China and India and Brazil began to learn from their own economists the privileges and the benefits you get if your currency is used around the world. And they wanted some of that for themselves, which again is what I mean by a declining empire facing demands that are natural as other economies grow. And one last thing, and the longer this continues, the more and more the rest of the world will make do without trading with the United States. It's not reliable as a place to export to. That's the tariff problem. And it's not reliable as a place to do business if you would need to import anything because of the tariffs. And inside the United States, you are creating a globally uncompetitive economy. Now, that'll take years to play itself out, but I don't see anything contradicting that. Nothing at all. The advantage the United States had in high technology, that has now been compromised by the Chinese demonstrating they can do pretty much what we can